Night falls on the golden age of humanity. Sons shall turn upon their father, and his worlds drown in blood. The eye shall open, and the galaxy will burn. Join us, listeners. We go into the canon lore of the Forge World Black Books on Heresy Grad School. Professors Jason, Patrick, and Dave, myself, will dive into the lore of the Black Books and the Black Library novels that we know and love, and explore the heresy as history. So, get a coffee, get your notebook out, and prepare to explore heresy as history with us on Heresy Grad School.
Now recording.
Jesus, that never gets any easier.
I can't remember if we recorded with G-Arc last time. I think we did.
I think so.
I think so too, because we got a full episode in, so that makes sense.
At least he doesn't say anything.
Right? It's just kind of creepy in the background.
That doesn't help.
Cool. So, yeah, I guess you want to kick this off, Jason?
Oh, yeah, sorry. I was engrossed in my notes here.
No, that's totally cool. So I'll go ahead and introduce this one, since our faithful tech adept Patrick cannot be with us tonight. It'll be just Jason and I, and we're going to be talking to you guys about something that is both near and dear to our hearts. And well, I guess we should say, before we go too much further, we were going to just start this as, I think, a one-off episode and talk about just the sort of the bonded night houses that are in book 4, the vassal bound or the vassal households of the Mechanicum, which starts on page 96. But as Jason and I started reading in the lore and reading in book 4, and we just both got sucked in, and we found the Knight Companion, and then we found a bunch of other esoteric lore. And I don't know, Jason, what do you think? At this point, we've probably got enough material to do at least 3 or 4 solid episodes.
Like, you were not joking about that Knight Companion? Guys, if you want just like the deepest of deep dives, track down this Knight Companion. It's fucking nuts. Like,
yeah, it was originally released, I think, for 6th edition.
Yeah, I think they were paired up with the 6th edition Knight Codex, like right when there was just paladins and errants.
Yeah, I think that's right. They were just paladins and errants. We may have gotten some like lore references to other types of knights, but yeah, we definitely didn't have anything in terms of models. This thing is amazing.
Oh yeah, it was kind of a different feel for the Knight houses too. Right when they started out, it seemed like since there were only 2 types of knight armors, you had like the paladin armor with the battle cannon that was like the mainstay, the stalwart of the Knight House veterans, who were the bastion against the darknesses of the universe. And then you had the Knight Errant with the thermal cannon, which was much shorter range, more aggressive. Those were given to some of the more, let's say, novice knight scions, and to kind of accentuate and make more effective their brash, aggressive nature. And what's really interesting, and we'll definitely touch on this more than once, I'm certain, is that plays in even farther down the road to how the Throne Mechanicum, which is kind of like the very tiny version of a Titan manifold uplink that's in each individual knight, how it kind of influences its pilot over time, just as the pilot influences and kind of adds his personality to the knight itself in the exact same way as a manifold in a Titan.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we should just say this if our listeners don't know, but like Imperial Knights have been around in the Warhammer universe for almost as long as Titans. I mean, the original Adeptus Titanicus game included knights. So, anybody who and I was in this group for a long time too, right? I thought, oh man, these are just weird, giant, walking robots that they're releasing for Warhammer because it's cool to have big models, but the knight lore goes back really almost to the beginning. So,
to be fair, giant robots are cool.
Yeah, fuck yeah, dude. I mean, nothing against giant robots.
As a Mechanicum player, I am a little biased, but I do remember the initial outrage that they were just going to ruin 40K as we knew it.
Yeah, they came out right alongside that goofy, which this really is goofy, that corn thing on tracks.
Oh, the Lord of Skulls.
Yeah, that was like, it was like a 13-year-old rage, icon. But the more I have read about knights, and I think the more I've explored the lore, man, the more I am really, really in love with it. And the treatment that they got in the Black Books is amazing. And then in the Knight Companion, it just connects all the dots. The story of the knights, the story of Imperial Knights and Mechanicum Knights is really the story of humanity. I want to say it's either the 7th edition codex or the 6th edition codex, but you know how most of the old codexes have like that timeline, like significant battles. I'll find the page reference for this, but it starts at the very beginning, like in M2, and you're like, fuck yeah, dude. I've never seen a Warhammer 40,000 timeline go back that far. And it talks about like the age of technology and the great, diaspora into the galaxy. And then it talks about the age of darkness and the dark age of technology, and then the Horus Heresy, and then it's just like, and this was 6th edition, right? I mean, this was a long time ago. This was before we really had a lot of the deep lore that the Black Library gave us, and the Black Books, the Forge World Black Books have given us. So it's really cool to go back and look at some of that stuff as foreshadowing. But yeah, Jason, we have a lot to get into. We should probably give our listeners kind of a breakdown of where we think we're going. Like, this might not be 100%, because we, Jason and I, we haven't worked out all of our notes, but I think we have kind of a rough sketch of probably what the next 3 or 4 episodes look like. So, Jason, you want to give our listeners a little read ahead?
Oh, sure. So, like Dave said, originally, after finishing up the Coronid Deeps there's a very interesting segment that's a little more, I think it's about 10 pages, on the Oathbound Vassal Houses, the Mechanicum, which is pretty pertinent to the Coronid Deep story, because you're talking about like House Atrax as a big one that's enthralled to Archmagos Dracovac, and they play a huge part in that whole deal. But as we started to get into that, we figured out, like, well, we don't just want to do an overview of different Oathbound Vassal Houses, because it's not just House Atrax. House Atrax is like one very far end of the spectrum. It's a night house that has basically been turned into attack dogs. It almost mirrors how the Fabricator General, the real one, Calbor Hell, not the Zagreus Kane on Terra, because Terra is not Mars and the Fabricator General is on Mars. But
such a heretic, man.
It's in the blood. But so it's almost like Kelbor Hal uses Legio Mortis to kind of get his way, to use them as enforcers, to persuade Magos that aren't quite seeing the light of the scrap code yet. It's almost that in miniature. But Dracovac used House Atrax in very much the same way, as attackers, as enforcers for whatever he was doing at the time. And that worked pretty well up until the very tail end there. But on the other end of the spectrum, you have houses like Night House Crast. And I must have said this a half dozen times now. House Crast is fucking nuts, man. It starts off, they're literally the very first night house that was ever discovered during the Great Crusade, and they're super proud of that. They were the first ones to, throw in their lot with the Mechanicum and the Emperor at large, and they set off on the Great Crusade. And they're actually the first night house to adopt the title of Questoris, which that little addendum to a night house means it's actively on crusade. But they're out in the Great Crusade, and when they come back to their home planet of Crisis, Legio Mortis has basically wiped it out. And to the very end of like M42 and the currently being written fluff for Warhammer 40,000, they are still pursuing Legio Mortis Titans. And it's to the point they're so tight in with the Mechanicum. The current fabricator general of M42 has gone to the lengths of making inquisitorial agents disappear when they start questioning Craft's motives. And it's fucking nuts.
Yeah. Yeah, no, they're pretty cool, man. And I think I had never really gotten into the Oathbound houses, the Mechanicum houses, and I think reading through book 4 and then getting into into the Knight Companion, looking especially at House Tyrannis, which so Crast is the first night house that's found during the Crusade. So they're the first night house that's encountered outside of Terra and Mars. But there were night houses on Mars before, Tyrannis being one of them. They were actually the first one that in the very beginning of the Mechanicum novel by Graham McNeil, the Emperor comes up and sort of puts his hand on the leg of the knight and fixes the old ailment, right? So I think it was Verticorda.
Machine heal thyself.
Yeah, and sort of, that was the Emperor proving himself to be the Omnissiah, or at least convincing the Knights of House Tyrannis that he was the Omnissiah and that they should follow him. But House Tyrannis has sort of an equally special place in the lore, because they're the only night house that does not have the Throne Mechanicum. So they're not subjected to the neural uplinks and the other kind of what Jason and I'm sure will get into, and what I will get into as well, which is some of the ways that the Mechanicum have subverted the Imperial Knights and even Mechanicum Knights, and sort of, I would say, written in some extra code on top of on top of the Throne Mechanicum, which in some ways helps and in some ways serves their purpose. But yeah, so Tyrannis is the only knight household that survived the heresy. There were other knight households on Mars, which I did not know about, but they were the only ones that came through it, and just barely, because I'm sure if our listeners have read Mechanicum, they'll be surprised to learn that any of those knights from House Tyrannis survived. But they did, and definitely looking forward to talking about that a little. Jason, what else are you looking forward to talking about?
So I actually got super sidetracked when I was, describing what we're going to do over the next couple of episodes, because I swear every time I get into like House Crast, it's fucking nuts, man. And so anywho, to our list, the plan we've been kicking around when we figured out this is going to be just way deeper than we thought it was going. We thought we'd split it up into maybe 4 parts. Have 2 parts dedicated to the Mechanicum aligned houses, one to do like an overview, and one to go in super deep into the lore on some of the specific houses that Dave and I are both fans of, and then to do the same thing for the Imperial aligned houses. Kind of do like an overview of like how they differ from the Mechanicum aligned houses, what some of their special terms and conditions, with signing up with the Emperor instead of the Fabricator General are. And then for the fourth episode, do a deep dive on a couple of specific houses that are Imperial aligned. We thought that would be a good sort of overall plan, give kind of the widest range and the depth to all the things we're excited to dive into and talk about.
Yeah, definitely. I'm also hoping that we can, kick the can down the road far enough that we get our copies of Titan Death. I know I've pre-ordered mine. The Adeptus Titanicus campaign, Titan Death, to see if that gives us any other clues on the Night Houses. I'm sure we'll get plenty on the Titan Legions, but specifically was wondering if any of the Night Houses from I know they did, like we already have House Veroni, and what's the other one we have, Jason? It's a Mechanicum household, but it's not in book 4. It's in I think it's book 6 and 7, the one with the scorpions.
Malanax.
Yeah, Malanax. I wonder if we should talk about that, because that seems to be a pretty popular one.
They're a pretty giant Forge aligned house. They're kind of like for Anacaris Scoria, what House Atrax is for Archmagos Dracovac.
Oh, wow. Okay. I did not know that. Yeah. So guys, we have a lot of, obviously a lot of material that we could cover, but we're going to try to keep it, like we could probably spend the next like 20 episodes just talking about different Night Houses. But I think we're going to limit ourselves to the ones that really have special places in the lore. Like Jason talked about House Krast. And I'll talk about House Tyrannis. And I think those two houses will be really good to go along with some of the Night Houses in book 4. We might bring in book 6. And then that'll give us plenty of meat to talk about the Sidon protocols and the Pact Morbidia. And if you guys want to read ahead in book 4, that's certainly where we started. And then get your hands on the Night Companion, and we promise you will not go back. So, and then we'll bring in some of the Imperial Night Houses. I'll talk about House Orlok just a little bit, because I think we covered them a lot. But I don't know, Jason, anything else you wanted to talk about? Like anything that's really besides House Krast? Anything that's really kind of you're just itching to get into?
I mean, I was kind of excited about House Atrax too, because in addition to, being the personal flunkies for Dracovac, they also, inflicted genocide on fish people. And I'm always behind that.
Now, this is when we started this, I remember the conversation was not all oaths are the same, right? So that not all vassal houses of the Mechanicum are vassals in the same way. And that gets into the Sidon protocols. And I think House Atrax is, they're kind of at the extreme end. Doesn't Dracovac separate them from their knight chassis and only let them? They're essentially they're basically prisoners of his, right? Until he needs them, and then he sticks them in their knights. And then is that Atrax, or am I thinking of a different one?
Right. Not to get too far into stuff, spoil or deep dive on it, but Dracovac does have a really firm hold on it, to the point they're not even referred to as a bonded house. They're considered a thrall house.
Yeah, that's right.
Which is it's a pretty interesting, extra step in that direction. And there are a lot of different implications in some of the augmentations and whatnot that some of the pilots of House Atrax undergo.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that almost matches. And I was reading about that, and I was like, God damn, that's almost like what you did with your personal Night House kind of back in, I'm sure before you read any of this stuff, right? You had kind of already created some lore for your Night House, right?
I was a really big fan of the idea of thinking at the far end of it, like the one unreplaceable part of a knight essentially is the pilot. The reason night houses are so attractive to the Mechanicum in a lot of cases is because they're massive, stompy robots that have like the skills, the reactions, the critical thinking, the ability to adapt on the fly of a human. And they're a lot more skilled and autonomous than, basic robots and automata. So my thinking was, well, why wouldn't a Magus at some point, out of desperation or I don't know, just to see if he could do it, turn a knight into a giant automata?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, because that's what like world domination bent Archmagos do, right? They want to be able to essentially have total control over their tagmata, right? So it's pretty awesome. One of the things I wanted to really get into, and I don't know, I can't remember where it is. I think it's in the Knight Companion, or maybe it's in one of the codexes. But the story of knights is the story of mankind, right? And the knight chassis itself did not start out as a weaponized chassis, right? It was essentially a environment controlled, void controlled explorer suit. So when humanity's launching out into the void, into the galaxy, right? This is before they have got warp technology. So this is the age of technology. As they're launching out, they know they're not coming back because we don't have that technology right now. So they create these giant arcs and arc environments, right? And colony ships and colony armadas, and they just launch out and until they find a world that's habitable. And so these knight chassis, if you could imagine them, they probably had like hands, they probably had sampling equipment, they probably had whatever they needed to start that initial colony wherever they landed, whatever environment they were going to be in. They didn't know. But over time, if they met hostile Xenos, or if the well, certainly by the time of the Age of Strife, right, when the warp opens up and demons, infest everything, the worlds that survived were the worlds that still had knight chassis, and that they weaponized them. But what's really funny is, and please stop me if I'm getting ahead of myself, but I think one of the knight houses that they find at the beginning of the Great Crusade has like literally lost the ability to maintain their knights. So it's essentially the knight, but it's walking, but it's using diesel power. It's got a spear like not duct taped, but like roped to its arm. Do you remember reading that?
Yeah, that's actually House Maccabeus.
Ah, it's so good, man. Yeah. So it's like this. They like find these guys, and they're like literally, 10,000 years of separation from the Great Crusade and the Age of Strife, Old Knight, and they're just fighting off these beasts and these Xenos and knight chassis that are running on like diesel fuel, and they have they've got like really long spears duct taped to their arm. It's fucking awesome, man. But they're still like, yes, we need you.
Well, one thing I thought was pretty fascinating was just the range of how some of the knight houses coped with their independence, and how some, like you said, some degenerated to the point where their knights were barely functional. Others lost pretty much every knight they had, and there might be knight armors on the planet still, but they've been like overgrown, by forests and weeds for thousands of years, and nobody really understands why they still keep the traditions of the feudal system they had going alive. But they've just been doing it for so long that even though the knights aren't there anymore, or the knight armors, I should say, aren't there anymore, they're still like a royal family that follows that exact same system of feudalism. But then in the other direction entirely, they're night houses that have managed to keep themselves together, that still have functional, powerful knight armors that are more or less maintained by the sacristans they've had on staff. But it's become such a insular society because who's going to show up on a night world and tell them to change anything other than like the emperor or fabricator general? So they've just become so set in their ways that they are almost a couple of different books mention they're almost like frozen in time because they've become so insular and xenophobic.
Well, it was part of how they survived Old Night, right? Is that they became insular and xenophobic, and they, essentially made sure that there was no portal for demons to come through, right? So they killed all the psychers. They closed down all the warp routes, right? They basically cut themselves off. And, that's why during the Great Crusade, they were finding like night planets right next to Forge worlds that had no idea they were there, because just nobody was talking to each other, because they were like, yeah, the last time we tried to talk to him, this, fucking, demon incursion happened. So we're not talking to those guys anymore. So yeah, it's really, it's so cool. And I love the variation and the variety that's out there just in the night houses that, we know about. One of the things that we'll get into is really interesting, though, I think, is one of the commonalities is what Jason just alluded to with the sort of the feudal system, right? And sort of the nobility being bloodlined, and how that's really important. And it's really important to the Mechanicum. It's really important to the Imperium, and it becomes sort of reinforced through the Throne Mechanicum. But we'll definitely get into that linkage in one of our other episodes. God, there's so much good stuff to get into, man. I could just start talking now, Jason. I'm afraid I wouldn't stop. So
I know the feeling.
Yeah, guys, definitely, get your notes and get a cup of coffee and read through book 4 and the Imperial Knight Companion, and I think you'll enjoy the ride that much more next time Jason and I get on. But I don't know, Jason, you want to say anything else tonight before we leave it?
I can't think of anything other than the fish people deserved it, but outside of that,
God, you were just really on those fish people, man.
It just, people admit that The Shape of Water was a shitty movie.
I've never seen it. I'm assuming I shouldn't, because
you should not. Like, it's like Megan has strong opinions on it too.
Wow.
Well, let me just say, Jason described it as being the backstory on Abe Sapien from Hellboy, and it was definitely not. It was just a weird fish sex movie.
Wow. Yeah, that does not sound really appealing in any way that I can think of, unless maybe somebody has a weird mermaid fetish.
But I'm just saying, like, when Dracovac took that planet over and he gave like 0 fucks about fish people and he just started turning them into, ad secularis and servitors, I think he had the right idea. I'm just saying.
I'm not going to argue with that. There were 40 million colonists on the planet, though. Like, it was not just a fish person world when Dracovic came down. Like, there were, and they were basically the resistance, right? They were the ones that then fought off the Mechanicum, so that Dracovic had to come down, right? It wasn't. I don't think it was the fish people that were putting up as much of a resistance to the Mechanicum as it was sort of the Solar Auxilia cohorts that had been fighting this sort of guerrilla warfare against presumably fish people for a really long time. But yeah, Jason, that just makes me want a model of a fish person so that we can now play a campaign based on Numenal with fish people. Hey, if you guys have not been listening to the regular podcast that we do here, the Remembrancers Retreat podcast that Jesse and Will and Ryan host. Did we plug this last time, Jason? I can't remember. I think we forgot. But the guys from Oz 30K have an amazing Kickstarter right now, and we meant to talk about it, but now is an even better time because the Kickstarter has what they're calling Jason. They're calling it like a night house engineer, but it is a sacristan, right? Have you seen this?
I have.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. And then they also have the night house, the errant, right? So it would be like an ambassador. So that's really cool. And so the guys from Oz 30K have clearly read the lore, and maybe as a stretch goal, we could get them to do fish people.
I mean, they do have what are the stupid soggy elves called in Ages?
Oh God, you're right.
Yeah, that's pushing uncomfortably in that direction.
I haven't seen the movie, so is that what they look?
I mean, kinda, yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, there you go, guys. You guys too can recreate the first invasion of Numenor with Deepkin. Wow.
That's what Guillermo del Toro has come from. We went from Pan's Labyrinth to a fish fucking movie.
That's sad.
Sad.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's all I got for tonight.
Yeah, I think that's a great place to leave it off, guys. So definitely stay tuned for more deep lore to come. Thanks for listening, guys. We'll catch it in about a week. Maybe Patrick can finally find his way back to the podcast.